We're recording. Today I want to talk to you about Plato's Book 8 of the Republic. Republic Book 8. And let me put up my slide here. Get to that right off the bat. Okay, so we can talk about, Republic Book 8. I think that for one thing, my interpretation or emphasis, I guess I would say, is what some people call cosmological. That is, I take it that Plato's metaphysical theory of the distinction between form and matter and the interaction of matter and form is really the central idea that kind of unifies all the rest of the applications. And of course, in the Republic, we're seeing the application of this metaphysics of form and matter to the applied areas of psychology and politics for the most part, as well as some other things along the way. So, so what I think we find in Book 4, what the treatment I'm going to give you of Book 4 today is one where what we're really seeing is very clearly the larger system, the larger theory of the interaction between form and matter, and the really intensely tight parallelism there is not only between the notion of the psyche, the individual soul, and the polis, the human community, and their sort of coexistence, but also the very, very tight parallel that they have with the central form matter distinction. So I want to get on with that. As I say, I think Book 8 is helpful for understanding Plato's larger system. So the metaphysics of form and matter, let me just again speak about that just for a moment. Of course, always assuming here with each one of these videos that you might be here in good faith and not be familiar with some of the basic things. So I really try and start pretty basic stuff. So what we have in the Republic is Plato's sort of mature statement of his doctrine. Of course, later on in some of the later dialogues, some other questions are raised. So he does go on as a thinker, but the sort of classic notion of the form matter distinction is explained here in the Republic. So what we have here is, and let me step out of this for a second. So what you want to look at here, I would make 2 points really quickly. One is that we're looking at a metaphysics of concrete particulars, that is the metaphysical theory of particular objects. Plato takes an object to be something that is recognizable or intelligible because it can be identified as a member of a category. And the thing that's going to make an object a member of a category is its combination arrangement of properties. So the properties, of course, are the things that don't come to be and pass away, whereas the individual concrete particulars are what? They are matter coming into participation in form, becoming greater, better and better defined by their participation in form until they are intelligible, until as the sun makes something visible. They are intelligible in as much as they can be identified as an object, a member of some kind of set of objects. That would be point one. And point two is that we don't have here a real distinction between concrete particular objects and the person. The person's soul is partially form and partially material object. Okay, so let's go back to the slide here. Am I sharing the screen? I think I am. Yes, here. Third bullet point there, material world, then including human beings, is coming to be and passing away. What I was saying about the soul is it's not sort of, the soul also comes to be and passes away, in as much as the soul, just like any other thing, is participating in form and then slowly coming out of form. So some abstract things, in this case, soul really coming to be when the parts of soul come into the right arrangement. And notice also things like the human political community. But these things in Plato are treated just the same way that concrete particular objects are treated. And I think part of the reason that we don't see that as clearly is because we're used to early modern Cartesian dualist notions of the soul as something by definition sort of immaterial. And finally, that third bullet point there, or rather the last bullet point, you've got the psyche and you've got the polis, and these things come to be and pass away together. That is, you can't have a particular kind of psyche unless it has that sort of human social community that corresponds with it, and vice versa. So individual persons come up into existence and then fade out of existence along with communities, because the person is, after all, a part of the community. And Plato is always going to be stressing unity, and we'll see why that is. We get into a little more deeper into some of his metaphysics. So again, and also remember sort of degrees of being, and degrees of being is also going to apply to persons. I think maybe that's really a little bit more deeply into some of Plato's thinking that gives us political intuitions that sometimes we modern liberal people don't like. Okay. So then briefly, just put it in place in the larger republic. The first part of the republic, we've set up this challenge, and Glaucon is actually the one who formulates it properly, that if the unjust man, the person whose parts of soul are not in the proper relationship, has all the material blessings, all the political and social blessings, even all the internal sort of phenomenal pleasure blessings, and it's the story of Job, right? And the just man does not have those things. Then they're curious about what is good in itself about justice. And one of the things they're thinking about is individual experience. Is there something good in justice in itself in terms of individual experience, the way there is, say, with a drug that you take, right? And might do something good for your experience. And then the group is very literal, and they sort of force Socrates into talking about the Kallipolis, the actual city, which is where we get, particularly, for example, in book 4, we get this discussion of the parts of soul. And then in book 5, we get the discussion of the communistic class of philosophers who have communal families and so on. It's all very controversial. So Plato hides behind that by pretending that Socrates is forced to say it. And then we finally, in book 6 and 7, get the sort of peak of the Republic, where we get the great analogies, analogy of the sun, analogy of the divided line, and analogy of the cave at the beginning of book 7. So, and then it's in book 9 that we finally end that discussion about who's happier, the philosopher or the tyrant. And in book 10, you get some sort of final teachings about aesthetics and spirituality that we'll look at when the time comes. So book 8 then is telling the story of moving down from the philosopher and the community that the philosopher is a part of and represents, in the downward movement of, again, the thing, the intelligible thing, in this case, the polis, and the psyche of the citizen of the polis, going down and fading down into material disorganization and unreality. So, and so again, I think a real key way to understand what's going on here, the key way to understand what's going on here, as we see here, then this is all a particular application of a larger theory about the way that matter interacts with form. And I would always want to stress that in reading anything in the Republic, including the social and political stuff. A little bit more. First bullet point, as I say, I'm not idiosyncratic. My view is one fairly standard view, which is that I take his cosmological and ontological ideas really to be at the center and to be driving things. As I said, he thinks all intelligible objects are so because they are participating enough in some form or another, some combination of universal properties or another, to be considered members of a set. I mentioned Kant there briefly in the first bullet point. Let me try and make that really short and sweet. A lot of modern philosophy has to do with the mind, a conceptual structure of the mind, kind of projecting a lot of things, including these universal properties, out onto the world. It was a stratagem for sealing off the scientific world and leaving some other worlds to do other things. That's okay. The point we need to worry about right now is just this: when we're reading Plato, what we don't want to do is read Plato as Kant. We don't want, because he's not what he's saying. He's not saying that there are these ideas that originate mentally and then are projected out onto the world. For one thing, he doesn't really have a mind-body distinction like that, really, very much. But more importantly, he's just making general cosmological claim that the cosmos is in form, that form is something that permeates the cosmos. So, so let's look at the second bullet point. This process then of coming to be and passing away, of matter coming into intelligible form, and then losing that definition and ceasing to be a thing. This process is exemplified not only in the development of a citizen of a polis who comes to be and passes away coincidentally with his or her political community, right? The community, the political community creates the social personality. The social personality is constitutive of the political community. And in the development of the psyche itself in the life of any individual. So again, it's not, it's deeper than just the idea that, well, here I am fully formed, but I just think that society could be a more just society. So I'm going to change society. But when that changes over, I'll still just be the same way that I am now, essentially, in terms of myself as a mind, as a thinking being, only we will have improved the world. But Plato sees something happening that's much more radical, much more holistic than that. On Plato's view, the society forms the individual. The society is constitutive of the individual, and again, vice versa. So rational revolution for Plato really is a transformation of the person and not just a liberation of the person as they are. It's a spiritual emancipation. A person is, again, second bullet point, a person is a person to the degree that they are rational, just as a wheel is a circle to the degree that it is true. And that's a matter of degree. Loses enough true, it's not a circle anymore. And what is that? That's all of the points on the rim of the bike being in the right relationship with each other. And what is being rational on this view, that is all the parts of soul also being in the right kind of relationship with each other. So, and then finally, the last bullet point. For human beings, formal coming to be is the emergence of value. Because form is the only source of value. If the universe wasn't organized formally, then the universe would be a chaotic sort of plasmic kind of place, and value wouldn't be there. The only value is in rational, intentional beings who could have acted otherwise, but who act according to their rational motivations rather than their physical or passionate or animal ones. The wholly material animal, just like a hedgehog, right, or a wolf, a human can be like that too, but they're not much of a person, since Plato defines rationality as the property that makes a person a person. And so really the whole argument, you can see the whole argument here in the Republic in Plato's notion of freedom, because Plato thinks to the extent that you are an animal, to the extent that you're a fleshly being, you're under the compulsion of cause and effect relations, and you can't act otherwise. You're just a brute. And his theory of freedom then is that what freedom is the ability of the rational mind to intervene, and change the behavior in a way that where the soul isn't being pulled down by these mindless material compulsions. And so right there, then you can see that if the tyrant is just going to be defined as someone who's entirely driven by their compulsions, then, I mean, they're not even going to be a person, let alone be happy. All right, so you have this downward movement. So you have meritocracy or aristocracy, the philosopher, and then and that's starting from the top. Then you have this person who's an enlightened person who is capable of being mindful and appreciating and contemplating universal truths, developed the gestalt of seeing the world as constructed out of universal truths. Such as geometrical figures, among other things. Some of it's quite quotidian. Then there's the T mark. What is that? That's the name of a type of regime that is most unfamiliar to us. The T mark is the honor-based state. The T mark is the spirited person who loves honor. Now, what's going on here? Well, the T mark is, in this case, on the downward cycle, the T mark, the son, let's say, of the aristocrat, the meritocrat. And so the T mark appreciates and is acculturated into this value culture where there are things that are more important than your material possessions to people of equal material prosperity, nonetheless may not be equal according to both the T mark and the aristocrat, because they have other standards of value that they also use to pass judgment on people that way, not just their material success. So, and that's the sense in which it's a good thing. But the sense in which T-marchy is a downward motion is, again, the T-marks don't really appreciate the good. They can't really meditate on the good. That's the point. And so what they love instead is honor. But then this isn't a good reason for competition or for accumulating power. It's just a sort of fetish of honor, which is nothing but a reflection. Again, everything is, the realest things are the highest things, and then everything is a reflection of the thing before it all the way down. And Timarchy is a reflection of meritocracy that way. It's not, meritocracy ranks people according to some good reason, a reason why people ought to be ranked. Timarchy is just concerned with the ranking, and what you want is your high rank. So it's still no good reason, and it is inevitably going to lead to social disintegration. So, all right, and on the upward movement, of course, the T-mark, remember the early books of the Republic, we're talking about the early education of the Guardians. You basically go out on the playground and find the little kids who are, you find the little kids who are beating up the other little kids, as someone once put this to me, and then you find the smartest ones of them, and those are the ones that you want. Because again, you have to have that spirit not only to be a warrior, although being a warrior in the Republic helps someone understand the importance of universal truths, such as mathematical truths, but also that desire to go higher, to transcend, to move up instead of down. And the T-mark at least can be said to have that. Like the next stage of degeneracy, which is oligarchy. The oligarchy is really more sort of the normal state of things, I think, because what oligarchy, let's look at that first bullet point, the transitional state between the one and the many. Of course, above the divided line, you have the world of the one, the universals, mathematics. Below the divided line, the world of the many, individuals, empirical studies. So the presence in oligarchs, you have the oligarchs, so there's some social organization. I mean, that's what you can say for oligarchy, which is more than you can say for the other forms of human organization below the divided line, roughly, or below oligarchy. That is, there is at least, again, some dim reflection of some kind of rational order, in as much as there is still some order. There's at least an organization of the society into these classes and so on. But an oligarchy is, again, sort of balanced on this razor's edge of coming to be and passing away. So above that, you have aristocracy. We're on the second bullet point now, aristocracy and Timarchy, which are both examples of societies that are organized around the value of the one, around some kind of unity. And then below that, you have democracy and tyranny, which are states of the many, of multiplicity, lacking unity. It's the sort of the big problem if you have this sort of organic theory of the state that Plato has, which Aristotle shares with him, the view that human communities are really parts of nature, like bee colonies or wolf packs. Actually, I think that's one of the trenchant and probably, worthy aspects of Greek philosophical thinking. So third bullet point, still on the second one, oligarchy balances on the point of interaction, the two, right? So you've got the one and the many, but in a sense you've got the two, because the oligarchs coming from, degenerating from the T-marks, and oligarchy, is just divides, it's two states. It's the oligarchs, and then it's everybody else. It's the enfranchised and the disenfranchised. And right there, you've lost unity. And of course, once you start going into social organizations or lack of organization, that reflects multiplicity, then you just have then you have no real polis at all. So the oligarch, like the person themselves, right? I mean, you always have that choice. You can fall down into materiality, or you can continue to try to purify your soul and rise up towards the light. And this is the natural condition between the beasts and the angels. This is our human condition. And oligarchy is then sort of, where you usually find people in a society that's organized, because it's participating at enough of the form for that, but not much more. I would also say that one of the things that Plato, as a social theorist, is reacting against is a sophistic theory of people like Protagoras and Gorgias, who are getting it also from some of the Ionian naturalists like Heraclitus. And the idea is that the universe is a random universe of material forces without value, and that it's human beings who have to socially construct value through their political behavior. A very modern idea, a very early modern idea, one that is present in this, 5th and 4th century BCE Greek milieu. It's in fact sort of common social theory. Hold on, defend your law as you would your city wall, because otherwise we're just in a heartless, cruel universe. Sounds like Kant too, huh? And Plato doesn't think so. What Plato does is take that cosmological route, and he says, no, it's just not true that the universe is a place that's full of smashing, contradicting, random interactions. The universe is imbued with the good. The universe ultimately makes sense. The whole cosmos may be, in fact, some kind of intentional being itself, Plato thinks. Okay, so then you have oligarchy, and oligarchy again can go upwards. The T-marks will be the people who think there's something more than just a material existence, whatever that may be, and they love honor. The Democrats will also be well-intentioned people, though, who want to, who just believe in basically what happens if you are a denizen of the world of the many, and you're talking about individualistic ethics. It tends towards some kind of hedonistic theory. In philosophy, when we say hedonistic, we don't mean debauched or any of that juicy stuff. We just mean that the theory is that value comes from physical pleasure, physical experience. That's really the basis of saying that something's good or bad. So technically in philosophy, that's what we mean when we say something's a hedonistic theory. And Plato sees the hedonistic theory, obviously, is going to be identified with the passionate element, the physical element. This feeling, its animal cravings, its animal satisfactions. So, so what democracy is, the demos, the rule of the people, and it's the rule that aims at satisfying the material passions of the people. Bread and circuses, as they used to say in imperial Rome. So you're keeping all of the people happy, and you're doing that by catering to their material desires and their material passions. Socrates notes this is the most colorful society. You get the best cable TV shows. But notice something about that. I was talking about this before. We think of, we think of these as all 5 different types of states, from aristocracy to timarchy to oligarchy to democracy to tyranny. But remember, Plato believes in the case of states, just as in the case of persons, psyches, that there are actually degrees of being. Things are more or less states, just as individual humans can be more or less persons. That does follow from the view. And all of the states that are, again, I'm going with his analogy, below the divided line, if you will, that don't even have the sort of vaguely mixed motives of oligarchy, but instead are frankly states that are based on satisfying the passionate element. These aren't really states at all. Why not? Because the many, all of the individuals, each have their own compulsions and their own desires and their own and all the rest of it. They're not coordinated with each other. That requires rationality. That requires unity. So you can't really call a democracy then a polis, really, because it doesn't really have enough definition. It's not individuals bound together in some kind of constitutional rational ordering. It's just sort of a mob that way, in as much as we're talking about, in as much as democracy is the material satisfaction of the individual qua individual, right, as such. So it's not only tyranny that isn't really a state. Democracy isn't really a state. It doesn't have enough definition. It doesn't have enough unity. And the beast then, and this I think is one of Plato's most brilliant metaphors in terms of his political thinking. The beast is just the democratic masses, who it looks as if the leaders are in charge because they're just stampeding the beast around. Remember the beast, and why do we call it the beast? Why do we call the democratic masses the beast? Because the beast is motivated by passionate desires. So the beast cannot be reasoned with. The beast cannot be persuaded of anything. The beast doesn't accept anything or understand anything. The beast has no sort of collective psyche at all. You know, remember the human psyche and the real polis are all connected in the right way with the right balance, but nothing like that is true of the beast. So all you can do is reward and punish it. He has a striking awareness in the Republic of the inadequacies as he sees them of empiricism. Here, notice it's also a standard critique of behaviorism, which is an empiricist kind of psychology, only looking at the surface, positive and negative reinforcements to control the beast. But notice you don't really control the beast or tame the beast. You learn what the beast likes and doesn't like, and ultimately then you're the one who is enslaved by that. It's really the empowerment of the beast. That's what Donald Trump does, right? He can stampede the beast around. So, okay. So then from here we get that this onset of tyranny, as I say, it's in book 9 that we really got the discussion of the tyrant soul, which is sort of the conclusion of the argument, the challenge that was first set by Thrasymachus and Glaucon at the beginning to show that the just man is happier than the unjust man, even though in every worldly sense, the unjust man is more satisfied. So getting at that notion of freedom again in human realization, hedonism, first bullet point, the pursuit of material pleasure is oppressive to the rational soul. You know, it's just the rational soul is being sort of bullied and pushed around by these unreasonable animal appetites. So the soul wants to free itself from these material entanglements. The soul wants to be dry. The wise soul wants to be dry, but souls love to become wet and fall back down into being. Now, when the people now are happy, and they're solely motivated by their passionate desires, now they are the beast, and they can be easily manipulated this way. In fact, their movement can only be controlled in this kind of manipulation. The demagogue, okay, in Spanish we have guiar, the driver, the demagogue, the guide of the people, masters the art of taming this beast, learns how to apply the positive and negative reinforcements, classical conditioning to the beast. And since democracy, again, as I said, it has no coherent center or identity of its own. It isn't unified. And what among other things, notice this, it has to be this a rational, intentional being in order for you to persuade the being of anything, that this would be good or this would be bad. But if without rationality on this view, that really can't be done. The only thing you can do is threaten and reward. So, so there isn't anything that you can do with the democratic masses for the democratic masses, because the democratic masses as such don't actually have any common goals or any common wants at all. So the only reason to control the democratic masses is for one's own interests, for one's own projects. And so eventually then this demagogue comes to have all the power, at which point you have the most oppressive situation for the rational soul of all, which is rule of the passionate desires of one contingent individual being. And that's, of course, the very opposite of the freedom that the rational being has to deliberate about outcomes and overcome their passionate instincts that way. And of course, and as I say, it's book 9 where we're going to get the full-blown discussion of this, but the tyrant then and their psyche also is a very poorly developed one. That is, it's just that the passionate element is completely in control. But then the tyrant also doesn't really rise to the level of a person in the same way that this mob of pleasure seekers doesn't really rise to the level of a police. So that's, that's the real metaphysical argument about the tyrant. But, let's move on and close up here. Is that the next one? Yeah. The numerology. There's all kinds of fascinating passages all through Plato and in the Republic. There's crazy logic sometimes, but there's also this crazy math sometimes. It's numerology. What's going on with it? Can we sort of get to the bottom of it? I think the most important thing is to understand sort of broadly where this is coming from. So let's just talk about that a little bit. Plato is influenced, in this ancient Greece intellectual scene. You have the Eastern Ionians, people like Anaxagoras, Heraclitus, and they are sort of naturalists and scientists. The Eleatics are to the west, and these are people like Parmenides. And among them are the Pythagoreans. Pythagoras himself, a fairly mysterious figure, but there was this faction, the Pythagoreans, that lasted long after Pythagoras was gone. These people are very much on Plato's transcendental wavelength. The teachings are that the universe is made out of numbers. In a way, I mean, both Plato and Aristotle would argue against the atomists, the material atomists like Democritus, that it's the larger thing that explains the smaller thing, not the other way around. It's the organism that explains the organ. This is Aristotle's teleology. So, all right. Then this kind of strange hybrid, it sounds sort of atomistic, because when the Pythagorean says, well, the line is made of points, the points are numbers. So think of the integer. When I say the integer, I mean, the number 1 is the number at the beginning of the sequence, but there's a sense in which, and we've talked about this elsewhere in the Republic, in which all the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, we don't have to think of them 5 as 5 numbers. 5 is the 5th of the numbers. The numbers all equal in themselves. That is the notion of the pure number, the integer. And that is the thing, the concept of the number, okay, that is in itself both divisible and indivisible. Think of the yin yang symbol. So Plato also, thinks that fundamental being, ultimate reality, is really formal, by which he does mean something like the formal necessity of mathematical relations and entailments. That's why when we know about mathematics, we know about stuff we know something that's going to be true and valid here and on the other side of the planet, here and 100 years now and 100 years from now, and so on. That's what he wanted. So again, he's getting that to some extent from Parmenides, and to some extent from these Pythagoreans, who quite literally think that the universe is made out of numbers, because they agree with what Plato comes to agree with, that it's the transcendental stuff. And Plato's also fascinated with the golden ratio, with what we would call Fibonacci numbers today. He believes, what's the big picture here? The big picture is that ultimate explanations of things in the world are going to be mathematical. it's interesting. I mean, I'm not claiming a parallel because I'm not really qualified to say, but at least it's interesting to me uh, that when you look at physics today, it's just very mathematical. It's about constructing a certain kind of mathematical model of the world. And in fact, these mathematical descriptions of the world turn out to be predictive, as the bending of light was predictive for Einstein. So Plato's really into all this stuff. The point he's trying to make, the general point he's trying to make, if we can look away from the crazy details, is that there is some sort of mathematical way of expressing this. There's some kind of formal transcendental way of representing and expressing all of this. I think that's really what it's getting at. Because then he says at this point in 546 in book 8, that there's sort of the number of a person. What is it? I mean, I guess we would think maybe the numerical description of a person. If we were interested in binary or digital enumeration, then we might just think that that's going to be some set of zeros and ones, the set that's just been assigned to designate that person. But I think here we've got more sort of the idea that there's some kind of set of relations, and indeed there are a complex series of squaring things and dividing things, sort of cracked instructions to follow. I say that because people have really spent a lot of time looking at this stuff, and but you never know. I do think it's worth it. In any event, another thing that's happening here is that in book 9, in the discussion of the unhappiness of the tyrant and the difference in happiness between the philosopher and the tyrant, Plato's actually going to give us an exact number. There's a number, and it's in the book. And so this is kind of setting that up. He's saying, I think another thing that is rhetorically, he's saying, these are relations of mathematical necessity. These are some kind of relations of proportion, ratios of things, and those are relations of some kind of mathematical necessity. It's an expression of his intense metaphysical and moral realism, I think, that he wants to say, you really understand all this, you're going to understand it at some kind of formal level. It's going to be some kind of mathematical representation that shows the necessary entailments, of the anterior propositions to the following ones. And that's really, I think, what all the numerology is about, although it's deep. And, again, it's tempting to say, well, some of it's kind of nutty, but who knows? Another thing, Greek and Asian thought, because we have this distinction between East and West, then, well, we take the distinction seriously. And so we have a mental formation there, the categories. But actually, particularly in the 4th century, you really have a great deal of back and forth all across Asia. It's not just the Hinduism and Buddhism, which emerges right around. Siddhartha Gautama lives at the time of Socrates, a generation or so before Plato. Not coincidentally, we call this the Axial Age. There's a video about the Axial Age in this series of mine here on YouTube. And these ideas that there's a kind of an element, a spiritual element that wants to rise up out of material being. That we must think our way out of our limitations as material beings is absolutely common to mid-millennial BCE thought, what's called the Axial Age. So, and nowadays there's lots of good scholarship on that. So it's not some crazy thing from the cable TV show. It's just real and very similar kinds of ideas. So just to flag that. Do we have anything now? It looks like the end of it. Okay, so Republic Book 8. I think what I wanted to do with Republic Book 8 today was use it to show you how systematic this is, and how systematic his description of transformations at the psychological and political level, upwards and downwards, are just simply applications of his underlying theory of the transformations of matter upwards and downwards as it interacts with form, a basic thing to understand. All right, so book 8. And then now we can go to the very, very beautiful books, 9 and 10. They're really wonderful books. All right. So I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.